I always feel odd when people clap initially because I haven't said anything yet. This could be horrible. You guys don't even know that. So before we get into it, I want to introduce our two special guests. And I actually feel odd introducing them because I'm pretty sure everyone in this room knows who they are. Right? Yeah, right? I would actually prefer to skip this part, but I was brought here for a reason, and I will do what I was told to do. Moderator's gonna moderate. So, John McWhorter is an associate professor of linguistics at Columbia University and studies Creole language, sociolects, and Black English. He is author of over 20 books on race relations, hip-hop, and African American culture. Woke Racism: How a New Religion Has Betrayed Black America is his most recent book. You can clap for him. Glenn Loury is Merton P. Stoltz Professor of Social Sciences and Professor of Economics at Brown University. He has published over 200 essays and reviews. 200?
Yeah.
I don't. No, it's not that. I mean, I haven't done 200 of anything.
You haven't been around as long as I have.
Oh, yeah. Good response. Okay. And his books include One by One from the Inside Out, Essays and Reviews on Race and Responsibility in America, and The Anatomy of Racial Inequality, Race, Incarceration, and American Values, and Ethnicity, Social Mobility, and Public Policy, Comparing the U.S. and the U.K. Round of applause, please, for Dr. Loury. You will know these two perhaps most famously from The Glenn Show, hosted by Glenn. Yes. And they often start, well, you often start that podcast by saying you are the black guys, formerly at bloggingheads.com or TV, and now just the black guys. Yeah. And you know what? I'm a black guy. Let's be black guys together. Can we do that?
Let's do that. Yes.
All right, fantastic.
It's such an effort. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's actually a good jumping off point because being black together is not as easy as it sounds these days. There's a certain script and narrative you're supposed to abide by in academia, and if you don't abide by that, you're called things like sellouts and accused of performing Uncle Tom foolery, right? So I would like to talk about that, especially being a co-founder of Free Black Thought, which is all about viewpoint diversity among black people. So let's start it off that way. John, how have you dealt with being called a sellout?
Well, the truth is that I can't say that it's ever hurt me. It's not something that I've learned to deal with because from the very beginning, when people used to say that, I thought that's so far from anything I've ever been or thought that it's as if they're talking about some cartoon character rather than me. And my thought was just, what would make somebody think that? And very, very early on, I remember I was dealing with an ABC reporter, a black woman, very intelligent and compassionate and fun black woman, who nevertheless seemed to think that she didn't use the word sellout, but the idea was that I had written my book Losing the Race in order to make money. And I asked her, because back then, I'm like 11 years old at this point. Literally, I'm probably rounding 40. And and I wanted to know, I said, her name was Carol Simpson, I'm gonna say now. She was somebody who was more prominent than she is now. But I said, Carol, you clearly think that I'm trying to make a buck in saying these things rather than that I really believe them. What is it that you think is going to happen? What do you think I'm trying for? And I meant it. And she said, she's the first person who ever said it, she said, people like you are trying to make money from conservative organizations and right-wing think tanks, and they're going to give you about $20,000 a pop, and that way you get rich. And she meant it. She looked me right in the eye. And I said, Carol, do you realize that that's not what I'm doing? And as brilliant as she was, I could just see that there was this opacity in her eyes. She couldn't see past it. And that led me to think not what a terrible person she is, how sad it is that people don't like me. I thought, why would somebody that bright actually have that vision of me? And I thought, okay, what it is that someone like her thinks that when it comes to race issues, there's only one truth. That if you're talking about, relativity or, why the Revolutionary War started or various other things, that there are many truths. But when it comes to race, there's only one. And so if somebody says something different, they must be evil. And so I thought she sequesters a part of her mind on race, and therefore, naturally, I come off as a cynical villain. That makes perfect sense. I could imagine someone thinking that way. Many of you will know that that's probably the seed of what I started calling religion in about 2015. But my thought was not that she was a terrible person, but as sure as hell wasn't me looking into myself one day while I'm rubbing lotion on my hands or something and thinking, am I a sellout? It never occurred to me. And so to this day, if somebody says that I'm a shill, I think they're talking about this cartoon character because of this limited way that so many people, unfortunately, think of as the enlightened take on race. But it's perfectly understandable, and therefore it doesn't make me mad. I want to read about my dinosaurs, and I just kind of move on.
Yes. You make a good point that otherwise intelligent people just devolve into guessing when it comes to this kind of thing. It's like they're not thinking so much as they're abiding. They're abiding by a particular narrative that they've been told and convinced is the only narrative. And
they sincerely believe that.
Yeah, and they sincerely believe it, yes. Enough about me. Glenn?
It pisses me off. The stakes are way too high. The truth of the matter is that those of us who take the risk of speaking out as best we can about these issues on race are the ones who are showing that they actually care about the well-being of, quote, our people. So this move, this high-handed move of ad hominem attack, which doesn't actually bother to rebut your argument, but instead calls you a name, pisses me off. We can't afford it. If you'll allow me the first person plural here in reference to African Americans. We can't afford it. The prison's overflowing. The classroom's not functioning. The family's in disarray. We can't afford it. We need clear-headed, straight shooting. Now, I can be wrong, okay? Argue, facts, evidence, reason, show me that I'm wrong. But don't tell me to shut up.
Okay. I like the passion because I feel it myself, and I feel kind of justified and vindicated being up here and hearing other people go through similar things. I can tell you, and I tell people this all the time, it is a mind fill in the blank to be called a white supremacist by a white person. It's really strange. I've learned to laugh at it though, because that is absurd, right? And I have to laugh at it. That's what helped me deal with all this stuff. In fact, I've laughed at it to the point where I'm starting to enjoy it. Now, and I want to ask you this. I mean, you've all been dealing with this longer than I have. That's not, I'm not talking about your age. I mean, you guys are very young, right? But you've been
in the field. That's the first time
field.
Anybody has said something like that to me. I'm 56. Go ahead.
Yeah. See, but how do you deal with it? I've learned to welcome it, to embrace it. I kind of want the fight. Maybe there's something wrong with me, but that's where I am right now. How do you guys approach this? How do you deal with it?
You don't deal with it. It's something that somebody thinks because of a limitation on their thinking, literally, and I try to imagine what it would be like to be them. I try to imagine going behind their eyes, seeing, smelling, and hearing the world the way they do, and imagining how I would come off. And I can see it. And unfortunately, on those sorts of issues, people, and I'm not talking about black people, white people do this too, this is just people, on that kind of topic, people are unreachable. Some people don't like that I'm putting it that way lately, but they're people who can't be changed. And so I figure, okay, they see me that way, but it's an absurdity. It's based on a limitation of theirs. And then I try to remember, and this is going to sound like this corny thing about individuality, but I try to remember, except I shouldn't even say, that's jet lag actually, it's making me say try. I effortlessly think to myself that I have stuff that I'm doing. I have my linguistics, I do love dinosaurs, I do love Looney Tunes, I love my daughters, I have my friends, I drink my liquor. I've got all sorts of things. And that matters more to me than what some person who's limited in one part of their hypothalamus thinks about me because they don't like the cut of my jib or they don't understand that race isn't easy. It has nothing to do with coping. It's meaningless. And so there are things that hurt me, certainly, but it definitely is not that person saying that if it's a black person, it's that you're a sellout or an Uncle Tom. And I think you're talking about a fiction. If it's a white person, it's looks like you're a white supremacist. And I'm sorry for that imitation, but that was not deliberate. But that doesn't touch me either because it's their limited thinking and I have an article to write. It doesn't touch you. That's at least the way I've always thought about it.
Yeah, we're preaching to the choir here a little bit, obviously. And I think it behooves us to try to imagine what's going on when that kind of sellout attack is levied. And I think one of the things that's going on is it's a call for solidarity. Aren't we on the same team here? By challenging our central beliefs, you're betraying us in some sense. I think that's part of it. I think part of it is, don't you know that other people will hear you saying this? And whatever the merits are of what you're saying, others will distort it and use it for their own purposes. The right wing, the white supremacists, the anti-racists, they'll be encouraged by what you're doing. So you need to think about that. I think that's what people are saying. But I'll say this, to be called a coon, an Uncle Tom, someone performing in blackface, a step and fetch it, hurts. I can't just shrug it off. It hurts, and maybe that's one of the reasons why it makes me angry. It hurts.
Doesn't hurt me. Really, Glenn? Glenn, does it really get to you? Because for me, it's like listening to somebody dressed in a strange cartoon suit. It's from another world. Does it get to you?
It does, and I mean, I can tell you a story after One by One from the Inside Out came out. This is all the way back in the 90s. I went to Chicago to a book affair at HxA Conference's bookstore on 75th Street and Cottage Grove Avenue on the south side of Chicago. Now, HxA Conference, otherwise known as Don Lee, was a black arts star during the 60s and 70s, a poet, and he's an Afrocentrist. He has a bookstore. I went there to talk about my book. In the audience was my daughter and my son-in-law. And during the question and answer period, my son-in-law confronted me and basically said that I was a black sellout. That hurt.
Well, I can say
If my daughter's, mine are too young, but if my daughter's spouse pulled that, it would just remind me of how easy it is for an intelligent person to settle for this ideology. I don't know if I'd be hurt. I'd be angry that that person did that in front of a bunch of people, given how close we were supposed to be and that person is intimately involved with one of mine, but it wouldn't make me sad.
What hurt, John, was that you don't see me and what I'm doing with my life on behalf of our people? You reduce me to a cartoon character and then you dismiss me because I didn't spout rhetoric? I'm your father-in-law. You know, take me seriously enough to pause for a minute and think, well, if he's saying that, which is so foreign to what my own understanding might be, maybe I need to rethink some of the received wisdom that I've been operating on. Show me some respect for being a free-thinking black man. I didn't stop being black when I thought for myself. This kind of thing.
We could do the whole hour on this, But Erec, I know you want to go different places. And so what are you thinking?
I'm a flexible guy. We can talk about this.
Well, then I want to say that if I'm imagining this, I'm taking my oldest is 10, let's say in 20 years, Lord forbid she marries somebody like this, but let's say in 20 years, I'm picturing this guy standing up and saying this to me. My thought would be that guy, unfortunately, has founded his whole sense of being special on the pleasure of that victim-based ideology. That victimization mindset makes many human beings feel good. Psychologists are familiar with it. We tend to overdose on it. And he's one of those people. He doesn't have another way of feeling good about himself, and it's not his fault because he maybe was mentored by people like that. Unfortunately, if he went to college, he learned it there, you can be quite sure. And so he's standing up and he's doing this because he thinks that's why he's in this world. It's him like a bird stretching the wings. It's his living. He's expressing himself. It's his word. I get that. I can't be too angry at him for that because it's other people who put him on that path. He really thinks he's doing the right thing. He's not just faking it. He thinks that makes sense. And so for me, it's, gosh, I wish he would knock this off, but I get it. You can't see outside of your box. And so for me, it would be that. I know that why he doesn't respect his father, because it makes him feel good to call out racism, and he thinks that's what makes being black significant. He can't help it.
Okay. I mean, we could explore this, but I do think we want to go on to other things. I mean, because blacks are not the only group for which this kind of loyalty test arises. I can imagine the self-hating Jew attack being levied at somebody who has the wrong position about Israel. I can imagine somebody in the time of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, an Irish Catholic, who didn't line up with the right side of the argument being said to be somehow fundamentally disloyal to their kin and so on. So it's a, I think, general phenomenon that we're dealing with here, of which the African American experience is one instance. So, but this is also personal. Let's open it up a little bit.
Well, when this happens to me, if anyone cares, they're my muses. When people lodge these insults to me, it's something sellout or something akin to sellout or things like that, I get exhilarated. I'll feel apathetic. I'm not into research or writing or things like that. And then somebody will drag me on social media, and then I'm like, yes. And then I'm like 3 essays in a day. That's how I deal with this. They try to silence me, and they don't realize they're giving me a megaphone. And I do my best to channel this into something productive and something that can, work to push back on them, because we need to model that as well. What it looks like to push back on these things. Whether they're white or black, we're not going to take it, we're not going to stand for it, and we're here, and we're not going away.
Yeah, all right. I'll admit this, that it doesn't make me mad in the instance, because it isn't real, but pulling the camera back, thinking, not me getting called it, but lots of people like you getting called it, it does create a mission in me. One person said about me some time ago, don't make John angry because he'll write a book. And that is exactly true. That is part of what motivates me. Like, woke racism was me angry on a porch. I was just sitting there thinking, shit. And then I thought, this is going to be a book, and I started writing it right there. Yes, that does happen. I get what you mean on that.
Okay.
He writes a lot of books, guys.
I get mad.
No, I was going to, on a positive note, observe in my classes, when I give voice to some of my heterodox and contrarian points of view, to the chagrin often of students, white and black in the class, inevitably, someone will come up to me at the end of class, or maybe at the end of the semester, or maybe they'll write a letter. A black person, Professor Loury, you've changed my life. Thank you for offering a coherent vision. I had never actually heard a black person talk in that way before. In my other classes, we get the same old, same old. I don't necessarily agree with everything you're doing, but you're modeling a way of being an intellectual in the world That inspires me. Thank you. So there's that.
When people say thank you to me for comparable reasons, I nod and say you're welcome. But in my head, I'm like, if you really want to thank me, speak up. I can't be the only one doing this all the time. I mean, like I said earlier, I enjoy it. But the point is, just one person doing this is not as powerful as many people doing it. It's kind of common sense. Nevertheless, it's hard to find somebody who's willing to put themselves out there like that. And I'm glad that I'm sitting between two people who have modeled that for me. So I'll say thank you now because I might not see you later on. Thank you.
You're welcome, Eric.
We're talking about viewpoint diversity within the Black intelligentsia. What we're really talking about right now is how we are a viewpoint that is not popular. So it seems like a kumbaya session going on here, right? We're all simpatico. But to be real about it, we don't always agree on things, right, ourselves. For example, recently there was an issue of gun control and what we should do as a country, how we should go about dealing with it. And we have two people here who often agree, but not always on everything. And I think gun control is one of those things. So if you don't mind me asking, what are your takes on gun control, and what are the similarities and differences?
Well, John can speak for himself, obviously. In the conversation that I think you're referring to,
Yeah.
I was mildly and gently taking him to task for a piece that he put in the New York Times saying, in effect, and John can correct me if I get this wrong, that there's a moral stain associated with the history of racial segregation in this country, and there's a moral stain associated with our inaction in the face of atrocities like the Uvalde school shooting and the many others that have occurred. And he was drawing a connection or an analogy between those two. And the sum and substance of my objection was that appropriating the history of racial exclusion on behalf of that argument didn't quite sit right with me in virtue of the fact that the scale of violence ongoing in Black communities today, gun violence, taking lives of Black people in the thousands and tens of thousands over the years, was what it was. So that to me was a greater moral stain, if you will, and I gave voice to that sentiment.
And, it's funny because we talked about this, looking at our respective laptops. Isn't it weird doing this where, we're here and it's our whole bodies instead of, sitting at a laptop? This is completely...
Yeah, it's better, actually, because I can get up and smack you if I need to. Just kidding, guys, just kidding.
I remember this. I was sitting in my study, and we ended with this. And it was instructive in that I was not angry, because what it came down to is something that is so often the essence of what is instead dismissed as you're just an X or you're just a Y. It was an issue of priorities, and people's priorities are going to differ. What you rank is going to differ in terms of what's more important. Sometimes that would be racism. In this case, what I said was, I understand what you mean about all of the, for example, Black homicides that happen in such large numbers, but I was especially touched for reasons I could not completely address to you with logic that afternoon by the thought of multiple people being gunned down unexpectedly on a regular basis, whether they're children or not. It was the Buffalo one that really led me to think, if we can't get past this, it strikes me that segregation they got past when it would have seemed hopeless around the time of the Scottsboro boys that would ever happen. This one, I couldn't see how we were going to get past it and do anything real. And so I was really crying inside. And so that was my priority. Yours was homicides in Chicago and Pittsburgh and Milwaukee and Philadelphia and Oakland every single year. I completely understand that. I don't think that's ridiculous. I don't think that's wrong. I don't think you thought that I was ridiculous or wrong. We just identified a different priority. And therefore, how can you feel that someone is a bad person on the basis of something like that? I think that's some of our discussions. It's just, what do you rank higher?
Yeah. And you've got a megaphone at the New York Times, and that influences the culture. and the opportunity to call in the face of the school shooting problem, which is real and horrible, call to the attention of the public this other problem, which in light of the propaganda from Black Lives Matter and such is swept under the rug, was a missed opportunity.
And it's interesting you say that, because at the Times, I have a piece that's been in the pipeline for some weeks about the black-on-black homicides. And I want to say something about that, and it had nothing to do with our conversation. But to tell you the truth, current events keep making it so that it would be in extremely bad taste to publish it, and so it's kind of hanging there. So I agree with you to a point, and yes, that pulpit is important, everybody reads it, et cetera. I wouldn't leave out the black homicides, but I must admit, I was okay with the shooting one being first. And it got around more than most of the ones that I've written there, but I get your point.
Fair enough.
See? People can disagree in productive ways. I am now better off having heard that, right? So there's that. I do want to ask you a question, and this is kind of personal and quasi-selfish, but I think everybody will get something out of this.
Okay.
I didn't get into academia for this. I didn't get into it to push back on people who see one monolithic way of being black, whether they are black or white. I'm a rhetorician. I wanted to focus on the confluence of rhetorical theory and Buddhist philosophy. I'm into that. I love it. And then I got mobbed on social media, and now I'm this guy. And I mean, I'm happy to do it. As you know, I'm motivated to do it. But a part of me laments the fact that I've put that behind me for most, of what I'm doing here. You guys are public intellectuals, but you got into this for linguistics and your love of words, economics. Do you feel like this is taking away from your original mission in academia? And if it is that a bad thing? Is it worth it?
Ooh. Yeah. I got into this for the same reason you did. I was this Montessori Quaker school kid who wanted to study stuff. And I didn't want to study myself. I didn't want to study how my grandmother talks. I wanted to study stuff out there about languages. And I found in the mid-90s that when I would express certain views, and Lord forbid it would be anywhere near the media, but if you were a black professor in Oakland in the 90s, the media were going to get to you at one point or another. I found that I attracted this vitriol from a certain crowd. I now know that those were the proto-wokesters. And they were things that I thought were perfectly innocent about language, about whether or not black English is necessary in inner city school curriculums to teach black kids how to read, or things about Creole languages that are very inside baseball, but frankly, I'm correct and everybody knows, but you're not supposed to say certain things. And so, yeah, I got sidetracked, and those things did make me, I didn't feel personally hurt, but I thought there's no way that this can be the orthodoxy. I must fight against this. And here it is 25 years later, and I must admit that over the past couple years, it has gotten to the point, I hate to admit it, it's gotten to the point that I'm doing more of the media stuff than the academic stuff. I haven't had a new academic idea in 2 years, and I never thought that I would reach this point. How do I feel about it? On the one hand, the media stuff is more important than all of these little inside baseball things, but on the other hand, the inside baseball stuff is what makes me feel really good. The media stuff is a duty. It's a slog. You're making people mad. You have to produce something every 3 days if you're doing my Times gig, for example. Whereas the academic stuff, there's such a satisfaction in finishing an academic paper that no one's going to read. So yeah, it's an issue I'm dealing with in my 50s. Am I ever going to go back to doing the work that no one reads that's very satisfying? Yeah, it's hard. You're going to have more of this, because the truth is you keep getting pulled into this, and it is important, but it does end up taking up time that you used to spend dealing with finer grained and often more rigorous work. Yeah, you feel like you're, fine, I'm almost done. I sometimes feel like I'm not working as hard as I should. I do a lot, but I'm not thinking about those tiny little things. But then again, who cared when I was? It's a tough one.
Right. Glenn?
Yeah, it is a tough one. I mean, you have to understand, I've been around for a long time. My PhD is 1976. First 10 years or so of my career, I was a straight-ahead microeconomic theorist. I published successfully. I got tenure after 3 years out of PhD and became the first black tenured professor of economics at Harvard when I was 33 years old. And it was a very technical and specialized kind of intellectual work. You write down mathematical models about economic problems and you refine them and you get them published in a journal. Hopefully some people will cite them and so on. As John points out, the audience was pretty small. There was other people doing the same kind of specialized work. It's rarefied stuff, heady stuff. I liked it, I was good at it, fine. But along came the 1980s. I'm not going to tell the whole story here like this, but along came the 1980s, and I started becoming political and started becoming a neoconservative in my instincts. And I started writing popular pieces, magazines like The New Republic or The Public Interest, or Commentary, and others. That's how I got those 200.
Got it.
And I was in a kind of split identity posture. On the one hand, there is the journalism, the public intellectual addressing a general audience about a question of pressing significance for the country. On the other hand, there's the specialized work that only a few people can do really well, that you think you're one of those people, and you get your colleagues' affirmation from it, and you build your CV, and you have a life there. I came to think that that life was too small, the specialized life, talking to a few hundred other people around the world who were also reading these same journals, and that the allure, the attraction, the gratification from addressing something that the masses were interested in was a seductive attraction to me. When I made the decision to leave the economics department at Harvard and go to the Kennedy School of Government, that's resigning from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard University and taking up a position in a professional school, which is definitely a step down. God bless the Kennedy School. That was a fateful move for me, and I had decided that, the theoretical stuff that I was doing, as interesting to me intellectually as it wasn't the first order importance in my professional life as it had been, and I moved on. I became a public intellectual. Now, I didn't stop writing technical articles. Indeed, I had a bit of a renaissance in the 90s when I published a flurry of papers that are still being cited on various economic theoretic issues. But I was forever a different kind of academic after moving to the Kennedy School and beginning to write for those magazines. I haven't regretted this, but I'll say this. As a public intellectual addressing myself to broad questions of interest, having the foundation of mastery over the technique within my discipline has been a real boon. And even though there is no necessary direct straight line from, I wrote that paper in the American Economic Review, I wrote this op-ed in the New York Times, the intellectual discipline, the erudition, the mastery of craft, the seriousness of mind. So this is what I'd ask of the Ibram X. Kendis of the world and the others who pop up. He's just one guy. There are dozens of them who want to spout off about these matters to a popular acclaim. Where's the beef? Where's the foundation? Where's the intellectual mastery? I think I've got it. And I apologize for the self-aggrandizement there, but he asked.
Never apologize for that, whether I ask or not. Okay, so you mentioned Kendi and his ilk, quote unquote, Ta-Nehisi Coates, people like that. What they seem to have that we don't is a level of pathos that really pulls at people's heartstrings. Now, as a rhetorician, I'm all about ethos, logos, pathos, right? Credibility, logic, and emotion. But it seems to me, and I'm speaking for myself, really, but I think I can speak for you too as well. We're less about the pathos and more about the logos and the ethos. We're talking about things because we like reason and rationality. We have a healthy appreciation for those things. To the point where maybe we neglect the emotional. I'm not the biggest fan of emotions. I think they get in the way. The worst decisions I've ever made were from the heart. They're like, think with your heart, Eric. Okay. And now, ruined everything. But I'm wondering if that's a mistake. Perhaps we need to start spinning narratives that, pull on the heartstrings and get people to see us in a different light. Because right now we're just these cold people who, abide by nothing but logic and have no hearts. Thoughts?
Ooh. Eric, that's a very interesting point. And I think that the solution is for people like us, we cold, rational people. I think we need to be better storytellers and to let our emotions into our work more because, and I have to speak carefully on this, you've identified a problem. There's a definite appeal in the work of people like Coates and Kendi, and there are all sorts of good things that I could say in particular about Coates's work. You can't call Coates ridiculous. There are great things there. Well, I'll just leave that there, but the thing about Coates and Kendi is, let's say that there are about 100 things that a person can be, 100 positive traits that a person can have. Nobody has all 100. I would say of that kind of writer, that of both Coates and Kendi, if you look at what they do, if you watch them online, etc., there are two things that those guys are not, and they're representative in this. They are not interested in exploration. That's not their mission. They are proclaiming. They don't explore. And this, I don't mean this as a dig. There are 100 good things you can be. One of the things that they are not is curious. They're not curious. They think they already have it down. They're not interested in finding out new things. And that means that what they do is the pathos. They think of themselves as prophets of a sort, and I don't mean that they're grandiose. But the problem is that the nature of race is such that the issues are not easy. If you're not going to explore, if you're not going to be curious, you're going to miss a lot. All you're going to do is tell the story. So to be perfectly arrogant, I think that we cold rationalists need to learn to appeal to the hearts of more people because we're not emotionless people. I've actually made some choices from the heart that seem to have worked out pretty well, but I try to hold these things off from my writing because I'm just trying to analyze. That's my thought about that. I never thought about it that way. But if you're going to do race and you're not curious, you're going to miss stuff. And there's a lot of almost willful lack of curiosity among some of the most prominent and even brilliant people who write about these things.
Yes. I think that was cogent statement. I like this ethos, logos, pathos. I like that trilogy, trichotomy. I want to identify with the position that while the arguments that people like John and I are making, there are not so many people like us, are logical and are expressive of the curiosity that he sees lacking in others, they are not devoid of pathos. They are not devoid of emotion. And for me, a sense of dread that the, how does John Haidt put it, the stupidity of the discourse about race, the woke discourse about race, the stupidity of it, dread that will issue in destroyed lives, in pain, in loss, in a sense of failure to achieve our human potential. That people are wrong about these things is not just a matter of logic in my mind. That they are wrong is a matter of tragedy. And I see plenty of reason to be emotional about watching a train wreck unfold in slow motion before my very eyes.
Some of us like train wrecks, but that's just me. Perhaps we should, have as a salient concept not just ethos, logos, and pathos, but curiosity, discovery, right? Maybe we do need to focus and emphasize that purposefully. I'm thinking about this right now. This is just coming to my head right now, and I think when I do go home, I'm going to think about that. Let's make sure that this reader gets, to the best of my ability, right? Gets that I am curious, and I want to discover, and I want to know what they're thinking and why. Which brings me to the point of this event: how to make conversations work. How do we make conversations work? That's it.
Let me offer something for John to chew on. I mean, I think there's some general guidelines for making conversations work that I'd be interested in knowing what you think about. One of them is listening as well as talking. Listening to what's being said to you, thinking about it. One of the things that I like to do in my podcast life is, okay, the person has just spoken for 5 minutes. What did they actually say? Let me see if I understand what you just said, and then try to recap what I understood them to say without evaluation, as a way of confirming that I actually heard what they're saying. So I think listening is really very important. I think avoiding ad hominem, that is, showing a respect for the civility of the discourse such that even in the heat of argument, I don't go there with respect to this, what kind of person would say that? Instead of addressing myself to what has actually been said, I now make it an issue of who are you who has said it. That's what I mean by ad hominem. I think it's destructive of the possibility of real conversation. So listening and taking the other person, your interlocutor, seriously enough to address their arguments and not their person.
That, and in relation to it, I think a valuable message is to dissuade people from something that can be hard to get to because it's tacit. So much of this is about what people believe without knowing that they believe it. There is a sense among many, even enlightened people, that when it comes to issues of what we're today calling social justice with a capital S and a J, that you stop thinking. There's nothing to think about. So you could talk to them about any number of things, and they would understand that there can be both sides to the argument. But when you get to social justice, it's almost like talking to them, well, it's not almost, it's precisely like talking about whether Jesus loves you or not. Their sense is that we have discovered the truth about what social justice is, about what racism is and what it does and how it holds people back. There's no discussion to be had any more than most of us think there's a discussion to be had about whether slavery is okay. And therefore, if you're somebody who thinks that way, and it's very, very easy to think that way, then of course, you shut down in conversation, you start calling people names. I think even I might start calling somebody a name if they started arguing that we should go back to slavery. For them, it's the same thing. And so making people understand that race issues, for example, are not simple just because of the grievousness of our history, that's something that I don't think a lot of people have occasion to think about. And on my good days, I think maybe even some of the more hardened to logic about these things among us might understand that. There's always that sense that, say, history is complicated. Why didn't the Persians take over Greece, et cetera? And there are all sorts of things that you can argue. How did Reconstruction happen? What went wrong, et cetera? But when it comes to especially black social history, and not Reconstruction, but especially what happened after that up to last week, everything is very easy. It's all about racism. That's it. It's simple. And anybody who doesn't understand that is missing something, or they're a racist too. Why in the world would you think that things are so simple just because people were in slavery and then suffered Jim Crow? What makes these things so very, very simple? And I think that to get people beyond that is something. Because a lot of what we're talking about with conversations is not talking about whether it's a sunny day. It's not talking about how you're going to do your taxes. It's talking about these issues of social justice. And those are the ones that tend to get so derailed. Those are the ones that are ruining our universities. And I think part of it is making people understand that rationality and complexity doesn't end just because something is called social justice. It's easy to miss that.
I have yet another triad of concepts that I think about when I think about making conversations work, and that is values, attitudes, and beliefs. And I say that because we all have our reasons for having our values, attitudes, and beliefs. What we don't tend to recognize is that so do other people, right? The people we disagree with the most have very good reasons for the values, attitudes, and beliefs that are driving them to those conclusions. Recognizing that by itself could do something, right? Philosophers from John Locke to Kenneth Burke have talked about this. We can't help but see the world in a certain light, in a certain frame, in which we select certain ideas and inadvertently deselect other ideas. That's something we can't help as humans. Maybe just the recognition of that, recognizing that we can't help it, recognizing that we are all socially constructed to some degree to believe what we believe, will keep us from going at each other, right? Will keep the contention at bay, perhaps. In Essay Concerning Human Understanding, John Locke says, maybe if we just recognize this, we can stop the wars, we can stop the infighting, and just realize that this person thinks what he thinks for the same reason I think what I think. Let's start there. So that's my pie in the sky attitude about this. But I think it's time for Q&A. You guys excited about that? Okay, so I'm not entirely sure how this is working. Yes, we have people with microphones around the vicinity. So am I calling people, or are you? Okay.
Okay, great. I'd like to ask, I'm going to try to keep this brief. I'm a jazz musician and a jazz educator, and I have taught jazz history. I've stood in front of classroom and told them where the music came from. I think a lot of people here appreciate individuality. I've explained that jazz music is a fiercely individual music, and it's not a surprise it came from people who had their individuality taken away from them, so on. However, I think some of my views around race and social issues are closer to yours, and I feel like this is imperiling me, an adjunct music professor, trying to build a career in this world. And so I have kind of two questions around this, and I'll let you respond to any or either of them. One is, any advice in navigating this world for somebody like me, especially who you might notice is not actually black? And also, secondly, anything you feel about, is jazz still culturally relevant? When I saw that Wynton Marsalis signed the Harper's letter, I was shocked because I couldn't believe they asked a jazz musician at all. And, this was once a very powerful cultural force, and one thing that, it's really difficult sometimes to feel like, man, does anybody even still care about this music? Is it still culturally relevant outside of some tiny niche, some fraction of a percent of people? Can it still be a force for change? Can it be a force? It's increasingly institutional music that's being, in academia and sponsored by institutions rather than music of the street where it started. So I just want to say that and let you respond to either of it. Thank you.
Jazz is such a fascinating thing in so many ways, but I would say that if anybody is giving you SHIT about the history of jazz and the interracial history of it, the simple fact is that the history of jazz is driven primarily by black people, but there was a white story, and there's the book that Richard Sudhalter wrote that nobody could contradict, that should be put in the face of anybody who tries to say anything different. That's very important. On jazz, though, as a force, I don't mean to be unemotional or cold, but I love jazz. But if you think about it, and I'm sure you have thought about this, what's the new thing in jazz been since 50 years ago? Notice that you really can't say anything. That doesn't mean that jazz doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that it's dying. But jazz has filtered into other musics more than it has evolved by itself. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's just part of the jambalaya that's America. But I have a hard time seeing jazz as becoming a force in the way that it used to. It's just become us. In terms of navigating academia, I am so happy that I came along before this got so bad. I wouldn't get tenure today. It was already just beginning then, just because of some things I said about black English in the classroom. This is 1998. I was told by the head of my department that there were some people who had refused to write a tenure letter for me because they didn't like that I had shared those views with the public. But I slipped in. Now I would have no hope. To be perfectly honest, I would put a lid on your views that don't fit the orthodoxy until you had tenure, which is not to say that that's 25 years, but I can't see within the current orthodoxy how you could provide tenure for yourself while being open and honest, because especially in the humanities and the arts, the forces are so large and the prejudices are often so unreachable that what I would do today is fake it until I got tenure, and then I would, be dragging all over the place. Glenn, I don't know if you would say something different, but you and I hear from hundreds of such people all the time, and that's the advice that I have generally given. If you want tenure, you can't go up against these people. They're not well.
Well, I'm sad to say that I have to agree with you. Keep your head down until you've got the protection of tenure. The atmosphere is what it is, and one's not going to change that in the short run. But I admit to saying that with some trepidation, some sense of sadness, because it's acquiescing in a system that's problematic, and you become yet another link in the chain of self-censored consensus that affirms and supports the status quo. But, heroism is not, may not be your calling. Falling on your sword may not be what you want to do with your life. I wouldn't blame you.
And this is all the more reason why people who do have tenure need to speak up.
It's a good point.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. There we go. Thank you all for this really interesting conversation. So we're in a room full of people who, compared to the general public, are disproportionately prone to cancellation and disproportionately into academic pursuits for their own sake. And so I think we tend to focus on the loss of the latter and the existence of the former as some of the big stakes in this thing. But I want to come back to something that Glenn said about the tragedy, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate on, how some of these bad ideas are harming real people on a large scale, because I think that's the thing that's both the most important aspect of the problem and what focusing on is going to turn the tide.
Yeah, I mean, let's be concrete. So violence, murder, homicide, carjackings, assault, rape. So the scale of victimization in the communities where large numbers of relatively disadvantaged black people live is just unimaginable. It's astronomical. We spoke a bit to this previously. So there's no magic bullet here. You're not going to just pull on a string and everything's going to be okay. But if you don't get a sense of the nature of the problem, if you don't take it as sufficiently seriously as it deserves to, if you don't center it, you're never going to be able to get your hands around it. You're never going to actually be able to address it. Now, the racial aspect of this is just hard to avoid. It's right there in the stats. There are clear order of magnitude differences in the intensity of this problem by race. And we could go into the reasons why. I'm not going to say I've got my head entirely around it. But to sweep it under the rug, to come with cover stories about it, to make excuses for it, to fail to voice values, attitudes, and beliefs that affirm a different way of living for your people, to not call them to higher ground, to equivocate in the face of this tragedy. There are other things that are like that. 2 in 3 babies born to a black woman in this country are born to a woman without a husband. Again, this is not a simple, straightforward issue. Again, one could adduce historical and ongoing reasons, structural reasons that are relevant to the problem. I'm talking about the foundation of human development of young people and the role that the family and its organization and the resources that are brought to bear on that monumentally important task of shaping the next generation, and how it is disparate by race. Again, I don't have a magic bullet here, but the discourse around the question is divorced from the reality of the problem. Public education. The failure to fully develop the intellectual potential of generation after generations because institutions with a monopoly on the provision of educational services are not functioning as well as they might. We could talk about it. There will be a lot of political disagreement. But the extent to which we will get to the middle of the 21st century and still be dealing with the academic performance gaps that we are confronted with today, because we have failed to take seriously the challenge of reforming those institutions, is tragic. Now, I'll just finish this. The world is not going to stand still while black people fail to get our acts together. The world is going to move on. It is a fast-moving, dynamic, globalized, technologically revolutionary environment that we are embedded in. This 21st century is not going to wait. The Chinese are not going to wait. So if we don't actually get this right, we're going to be looking for generations at a blighted, dysfunctional, subordinate element of our population. And I'm not talking about a few people, I'm talking about millions of people. And it's fodder for demagoguery. And I think we're seeing it. That's what I would say. The irony of the fact that I'm saying it to a room of 500 people with a handful of black people in it has not failed to be noted in my attention. That's not an accusation. It is another tragic dimension of the circumstance that we confront ourselves with. You don't think there are black people who are also concerned about what's happening to these institutions? Where are they?
Other questions?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kristen, and I want to kind of build off of what you just said, Glenn, because we noticed the same thing being here. A child of the 80s, went to college in the 90s, so grew up in the Martin Luther King, judge people by their character, colorblindness type of education on race. Now I have my own children. John, they're about your children's age, 10 and 13. And I'm trying to navigate this world for them and this education on this topic. I listen to people like you, Coleman Hughes, Chloe Valderi, Kamel Foster, who's here. How do I prepare them as they get into high school in this college environment to be good humans, to look at the issues and think critically on them given the challenges that they're facing in the battles that are being, waged here in non-agreement on, how we're handling race in this country? Where do we go?
I have a suggestion. I think that the media economy these days makes this a little bit less of a problem than it would have been before about 15 years ago. I wouldn't tell them to read a book. As much as we're all about books, as much as I love books, books are an artificial thing, and they are going to have ever less purchase upon the public based on the nature of the culture, the fact that we always have phones in our hands. That can't be stopped. If they're that young, I would suggest that you point them to living people on the iPad, on the phone, who are speaking accessibly and about topics that are of interest to them. And see if you can get them interested. They might be a little young now, and the things they're going to pick up as teens. I heard about one teen community, I think somewhere in Connecticut, where the word racist is now this general put down that has nothing to do with how you feel about skin color. That's the quintessence of a bad person. They're going to pick that up. That's just going to be there because people learn more from their peers than their parents. But listening to people online who are speaking something closer to truth, as in acknowledging both sides. And frankly, that is us. But also, to them, us might look like old men. And so I think that Coleman Hughes, his spirit, I think, is looking over us. It's very important because he's only 13 years old. And so that makes him more relevant to them. I think it's important. Also, Coleman has done hip-hop work expressing these ideas. I'm not going to be getting to that. And Glenn, I don't think you are either. But he's doing things like that. But I wouldn't say it's the written word. That's for us. For them, make sure that it's living people speaking in living color online with good production qualities. And I think that might help. And also as much music as you can find. But I hear what you mean. I'm beginning to worry about my own kids.
Hi, and thank you so much for this discussion. I'm lucky to be in a loving 10-year marriage with a dark-skinned black man. We have a wonderful son we love very much. He has not been exposed to this whole debate yet. He, is the center of our world, our only child, loved by both sides of the family very much. I'm a little bit worried about how to address some of the anti-racist stuff he's very likely to encounter that suggests he's safer in a racially segregated space, and that because I am white, that I inherently don't have his back. Do you have advice?
I have no kids, so I'm out of this.
I'm just thinking of, I want to say something to you that's real instead of some boilerplate, so I'm actually reflecting, not going blank. But Glenn, you have to say something while I'm doing, we can't let the ball hit the floor. All right, I'm just going to go. That's hard, because what you're worried about is that your son is going to start processing you as this white lady based on this kind of debate. I don't know if that's necessarily something we need to worry about yet. We live in these times as opposed to the ones that we knew. And so my two girls, their mother is white, and often people say, well, think about the racism they're going to encounter. The people who say that are basing that on the lives that they, like me, led growing up in the late 20th century. It's not that there's no racism now, but things are different now among people of his peer group. It may be that he's not going to see you that way because we live in an extremely multi-ethnic society. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I would say that, yes, we always have to keep bringing this poor man up, but somebody is going to give him Ibram Kendi's work. And Kendi has now written a book called Stamped for Children or something, where it opens with him saying, I'm not giving you opinions, I'm giving you the truth. And then it's all of this stuff about how racism has existed, leaving everything else out. And that makes for good reading if you like a fairy tale. And that is the sort of thing that your son is going to be given by teachers, who know that it's simplified, but they think they're doing their duty and they have groceries to buy, they're doing their duty. I would say it's the same answer as I gave the woman over here. Point him to things online where people have other things to say, who are usually brown or black themselves. And that might help. But it might not happen. I don't think my girls are going to turn against their mother as a white lady, because it's 2022. That's my sense of it.
I think we have time for one more question. So I don't know where the mic is exactly.
Boy, we really end badly then. You guys are so cool. I have a really stupid question about conversations, which I think is what we were talking about. I learned the most about what sucks for people when they make jokes about it. It's really human. And comedy isn't all that funny anymore, which sucks. And And you
funny.
guys embody, there's been a lot of humor here, but we haven't explicitly discussed what the role of humor is when we have tough conversations. And so I'm curious if you have any particular thoughts, maybe the rhetorician might, about what it is to use comedy here, and if faux pas isn't really a thing that much, what a person who awkwardly makes glib comments might bump into. And should we be embracing that? Should we be testing the fences with comedy the same way that we've been doing it for hundreds of years? Or is that as dead as jazz?
The rhetorician does have something to say about that. A few months ago, I wrote an article called Ridicule Ridiculous Ideas, including your own. And that's motivated partly by Socrates in Plato's Gorgias. He says to Callicles, who is, a dick, he says, call me adult. I don't care what you call me. Let's just have this conversation. You can call me whatever you want. That's totally my attitude. And this is relevant to what you're saying because, if you can call me adult, I can call you adult. But here's the thing. I'm going to explain why I'm calling you adult, right? And the problem is that people just throw ad hominem, insults at us and run away, right? Or they say, I can't listen to you because of your positionality, which in itself is hilarious. But my point is that as long as you're willing to have the conversation, right? I don't care what you call me. I don't care if you make fun of me or anything like that. And if your idea is ridiculous, I'm going to call it out, but I'm going to explain it, and I'm going to give you a chance to defend yourself. All right? That was stupid. Here's why it's stupid. Am I wrong? Tell me. I'm all ears. So that's how I see humor in all of this. Maybe it's not exactly ha-ha humor. It can be, but that's how I take it.
Let me just mention that a few months ago, I put on an episode of The Glenn Show live from the Comedy Cellar. This is Noam Dworman's club in New York City in the Village. We had Shane Gillis and Andrew Schultz and Sam Jay and other prominent comics on stage, along with myself, Roland Fryer, and Coleman Hughes. And the central theme of the discussion was comics can say stuff that other people can't say because they can say, I was joking. It's a joke. Okay, they have, in a way, plausible deniability to be able to introduce ideas that are transgressive without having necessarily to take responsibility personally for them because it was a joke. And we kicked that around. It's available on YouTube, this hour-and-a-half conversation that we had with the comics. But that's a thing that, even though I'm not a rhetorician, I'm deeply interested in.
Wit is a form of intelligence. It is a way of looking at things from various perspectives and dancing around the taboo. It's a form of thinking of more than one thing at a time, and that's why it makes your diaphragm titter. There is a certain crowd these days, the people I call the elect. I can tell that's not going to catch on. I liked it, but the elect. One trait of those people is that they pretend not to understand wit when it comes to issues of social justice. And Glenn, you often think people are putting it on, and I say no, it's the only way they can think. I think in this case, the elect person learns to pretend not to understand what it means for something to be funny. Because with these issues, as far as they're concerned, there's only one way to think, the facts are all there, so what is there to dance around? And if you dance around it, you're a troglodyte and you're a bigot. The thing is, there does need to be humor to get the people on the fence. So for example, if you're a 14-year-old kid, somebody who's funny about this maybe will touch you more than reading a book like Woke Racism or something like that. You need that. However, the people who are funny about this sort of thing are going to have to be brave enough to allow that on Twitter, the elect are going to call them all sorts of names, pretending not to understand the difference between making a straight proposition and being witty. And frankly, they're just going to have to yell. As long as people can have the backbone to deal with that, wit will be very important in getting these ideas across, because wit is a part of being an engaged human being. It helps convince people. I agree.
And just one more thing. I think it's powerful to have people look at you laughing when people insult you, when people throw these ad hominems at you. The fact that you cannot crumble or start to cry or fall into the fetal position and weep, right? If you can take that with a smile and a laugh and even say, whoa, good one, you know? I mean, that's powerful. That shows that they're not that powerful, you know? Humor is a superpower. Wit is a superpower. And I think we can all develop it. I'm done. Okay. And I think we're done. So please keep clapping for John McWhorter and Loury. Stand up if you will, yes.